It was supposed to be an ordinary day. The kind of day where history quietly passes by, unnoticed. But for one moment, a single choice would forever change the course of that night, the course of lives, and perhaps even the way we see true sacrifice. On a hot summer evening, Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, stood at the podium, confidently addressing his supporters. The air was thick with anticipation, his words cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, stirring emotions, and fueling the fire of a divided nation. Yet, in the midst of the frenzy, no one could have foreseen the imminent danger lurking just beyond the stage. Behind him, standing guard with silent determination, was a man most people would never recognize, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses, his posture ramrod straight, an unsung hero in a world that often overlooks such figures. But that night, his role would shift from that of a quiet protector to something far more profound. In the blink of an eye, the unthinkable happened. A shot rang out, the sound sharp and jarring, slicing through the tension in the air. Time seemed to slow down as the crowd erupted in chaos. People screamed, scrambled, and ducked for cover. But amid the turmoil, one man remained still, his body moving in an instant, his reflexes honed by years of training. The bullet struck him. Right in the chest. In a moment of unimaginable courage, this nameless bodyguard had sacrificed everything. His life, his future, was snatched away by the very thing he had trained to prevent. But the aftermath. The incredible story of what happened next left the world in a state of shock, awe, and heartache. What did this act of heroism mean for the president? What did it reveal about the depth of loyalty, the meaning of selflessness? And how did one split-second decision transform the lives of everyone involved? As the dust settled and the truth began to surface, the answers were more powerful than anyone could have anticipated. The world would never be the same again. This is the story of a man whose final moments are etched in history, of a sacrifice that left everyone in tears, and of a tragedy that would forever alter the fate of those left behind. As the chaos erupted, no one could comprehend what had just happened. The shot, fired from the back of the crowd, echoed through the evening air. People screamed, running in every direction, their panic amplifying the terror that gripped the scene. The Secret Service, trained for moments like this, moved quickly, creating a perimeter, trying to shield the president from the explosion of confusion. But among all this madness, one thing was crystal clear: Donald Trump was no longer in immediate danger. His bodyguard, an unknown figure until that moment, had made the ultimate sacrifice. In the midst of the split-second chaos, the man who had stood silent and vigilant behind Trump had thrown himself forward with a reflexive desperation. The bullet struck his chest, his body falling lifeless onto the ground as Trump turned around, completely unaware of what had just transpired. The crowd was a sea of chaos. Security personnel rushed to the bodyguard's side, their faces masks of grim professionalism, but the expression of the onlookers was one of shock and disbelief. Trump himself, frozen for a moment, his usual bravado replaced with visible concern, began to process what had just happened. He was surrounded by his team, but his gaze was fixed on the fallen man, the protector who had shielded him from a fate he had never seen coming. The scene played out in surreal slow motion. Paramedics arrived swiftly, but it was already too late. The bodyguard was gone. His name, until now, unknown, was whispered across the stage. He had made a choice. The days that followed were filled with silence, broken only by the harrowing headlines of what had transpired. The public knew little about the bodyguard, his past, or the life he had led before that fateful night. Yet, as the media scoured for details, a picture began to emerge, a portrait of a man who had lived in the shadows. He was not just a bodyguard. He was a former military officer, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and chosen a life in service, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. His loyalty wasn't just to the president, it was to a sense of duty that ran far deeper. In interviews, Trump's advisors and security team spoke highly of the man, though his identity remained carefully shielded from the public eye. He was the quiet type, someone who valued his privacy and shied away from the limelight. He wasn't known for grand speeches or attention-grabbing gestures. But now, his sacrifice had thrust him into the center of a national conversation about heroism, duty, and loyalty. It wasn't long before the public began to learn more about his story. Friends and family came forward, revealing that he had always been someone who would sacrifice for others, a man who lived by a code that demanded selflessness. His mother spoke of his early days in the military, of how he always put others before himself, whether on the battlefield or in his personal life. There were stories of him volunteering at homeless shelters, of him paying for the medical bills of a stranger, and of him returning lost wallets without a second thought. In a country often divided by politics, the tragic event united many. People from all walks of life began to pay tribute to the fallen protector. Memorials were held, not just for the bodyguard, but for what he represented, the ultimate act of service, a commitment to something greater than oneself. Trump, in the midst of the fallout, took to social media, a platform where he was known for his blunt, unapologetic commentary. But this time, his words were different. Gone was the bravado and defiance. In its place was a statement that resonated deeply with millions. This man gave his life for mine, for all of us. His sacrifice will never be forgotten. He was a hero in every sense of the word. Later, in a private moment, Trump, accompanied by his family, visited the bodyguard's family. There, in the quiet of the morning home, the president expressed his condolences, but also his gratitude. The weight of the sacrifice was clear in his voice. The bodyguard's family, overwhelmed with grief, were also surprised to hear the president's sincere admiration for the man who had protected him without hesitation. For Trump, it was a moment of reflection. He had always been surrounded by protection, but this moment made him realize the human cost of such protection and the incredible sacrifice made for him. But what truly left everyone in tears was not just the grief over a fallen protector, but the way his legacy began to unfold. His family, though devastated, were determined that his memory would not be forgotten. A scholarship was established in his name, one that would help provide education to young men and women who wanted to follow in his footsteps, those who wanted to serve with honor, sacrifice, and integrity. In the weeks following, as the news cycle moved on, the story of the bodyguard's selfless act continued to echo. His name, once unknown, became a symbol of quiet heroism. The heroism that doesn't seek attention or accolades, but stands firm when it matters most. The story was no longer just about a bullet, but about a man who, with a single act, taught the world what true sacrifice meant. Trump, speaking about the aftermath in a public address, said, "We may never know the full extent of his courage, but we know this: the world is a better place because of him. We all owe him a debt we can never repay." And with that, the final tribute was written, not just in the history books, but in the hearts of all those who witnessed it. The bodyguard, forever unknown to most, had given everything for the life of a man who would never forget him. His sacrifice had not only changed the course of one man's fate, it had ignited a legacy that would inspire generations. The day after the tragedy, the news reports were filled with sorrow and tribute. But amidst all the coverage, one detail began to overshadow the rest. The world, it seemed, was not content to simply mourn the loss of an unknown hero. No, something deeper was unfolding. A story was taking shape, a story that no one saw coming. In the days following the incident, Trump found himself struggling to reconcile the weight of the bodyguard's sacrifice. As a man who had spent most of his life in the spotlight, he had always been accustomed to receiving the attention. But this time, it wasn't about him. It was about the man who had given his life for him. The bodyguard's name remained a secret for a while, but the quiet reverence for him began to spread, like an unspoken understanding that this man was more than just an employee. He was a symbol of something far greater. Trump, who had been publicly silent for a time, finally spoke out in an address that left everyone speechless. Standing before the press, he fought to hold back tears as he spoke of the sacrifice, of the pain, of the selflessness that had been exhibited. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He simply acted, Trump said, his voice shaking. This man, he didn't care who I was. He didn't care about politics. He cared about protecting the life of someone who needed it. But it wasn't just the president who was moved by the bodyguard's sacrifice. Across the nation, millions of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike, began to find common ground in their grief. The bodyguard had transcended the political divide. His act of courage was not a political statement, it was a statement about humanity. The outpouring of support for his family, for his sacrifice, was nothing short of overwhelming. Then came the unexpected twist. The bodyguard's family, who had been in seclusion since the event, made a public statement. The world learned that the bodyguard was not just some ordinary protector, he had a deep connection to Trump, an unexpected connection that no one saw coming. It was revealed that the bodyguard, who had been a man of quiet integrity, was not just a former military officer. He had, in fact, once been a close personal friend of Trump's family. Years ago, before the campaign trail, before the presidency, the bodyguard had worked as a security consultant for Trump's private ventures. His bond with Trump was forged long before the Secret Service days. For Trump, this revelation was a gut punch. A realization that this act of sacrifice was not only a professional duty, it was deeply personal. The man who had stepped in front of the bullet to save his life wasn't just an anonymous protector. He was someone who had been there, long before the cameras and the politics. The emotional weight of this connection changed everything. Trump's sorrow became something more profound. His grief became personal. He knew, at that moment, that the sacrifice was not just the tragic end of a man doing his duty, it was the loss of a trusted friend. A loss that was deeper than any political controversy could ever reach. The public's reaction was visceral. News outlets and social media exploded, with many expressing their astonishment at the bond that had been hidden in plain sight for so long. People marveled at the way the bodyguard had, without hesitation, placed himself in harm's way to protect a man he had known intimately. It was a level of loyalty, a level of bravery, that most people could hardly fathom. Trump, unable to shake the weight of it all, made a powerful decision. He would not let the bodyguard's death be in vain. He arranged for the hero's family to be taken care of financially for the rest of their lives. But more than that, Trump established a foundation in the bodyguard's honor, a foundation dedicated to the values of selflessness, bravery, and service. It would support military veterans, security personnel, and ordinary people who went above and beyond to protect others, without ever seeking the spotlight. But the most poignant moment of all came when Trump, in a rare, vulnerable moment, spoke directly to the bodyguard's family. He stood before them, surrounded by his staff, his voice a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. "You raised a son who believed in something more than himself," Trump said, his voice breaking. "He didn't just protect me, he protected the idea of service. His legacy will live on through you, through this foundation, and through the countless lives he saved by simply doing his job." And then, in a gesture that moved everyone who witnessed it, Trump laid a single rose on the bodyguard's grave. The cameras caught the moment, but it wasn't the spectacle that mattered. It was the sincerity, the weight of his gesture, the recognition of something far beyond politics. As the days turned into weeks, the foundation grew, and the bodyguard's legacy began to take shape in a way that no one could have imagined. It wasn't just a story of a man's death, it became a story of how one selfless act of courage could unite a nation. It was a story of loyalty, of love, of sacrifice, and of honor. The bodyguard's name would never be forgotten. And as Trump's presidency moved forward, it was clear that this act of heroism, this turning point, had left an indelible mark on him. For the rest of his life, Trump would carry the memory of that fateful night, and the sacrifice of a man who had given everything. And the world would never forget the lesson he taught us all, that true heroism is not about the spotlight, it's about the quiet, unwavering commitment to protect others, even at the cost of your own life. As the story of the bodyguard's sacrifice continued to resonate across the globe, something extraordinary began to happen. The weight of his selflessness became more than just a moment in time, it became a call to action. The nation, once divided by politics, found itself united in grief, but more importantly, in a profound recognition of something deeper. Something that transcended all boundaries. The power of human goodness. The bodyguard's life had been one of quiet service, of duty carried out without expectation of reward. He had not sought glory, nor had he ever hoped for his actions to be immortalized in history. Yet, in the last moments of his life, he showed the world what true courage looks like. Not the kind that is often celebrated in flashy headlines, but the kind that lives in the hearts of everyday people, the kind that acts without thought of self. This story was not just about a man who gave his life for another, it was a story about each of us. It was about the choices we make, the sacrifices we can offer, and the moments where we, too, can rise above ourselves. His death was not the end of his journey, it was the spark that lit a fire in others. In the wake of the bodyguard's passing, the world saw something rare, a collective shift in mindset. People everywhere began to think beyond themselves. They started to act with more purpose, with more compassion, and with more integrity. It wasn't about politics anymore, it was about a legacy of selflessness that demanded action, that encouraged every person to look within and ask, "How can I help? How can I be a protector, a guardian of good in a world so often filled with chaos?" The bodyguard's story inspired thousands to join the foundation he left behind, not just in name, but in spirit. It wasn't merely about financial donations, though those were important. It was about something far greater, the ripple effect of kindness, the power of community, and the realization that we all have the capacity to make a difference. People volunteered more, strangers helped one another, and in the face of adversity, the world became a little kinder. The true measure of this sacrifice was not in the headlines, but in the countless lives that were touched, that were saved, and that were inspired by the bodyguard's ultimate act of service. Trump, too, carried the lesson of that fateful night with him for the rest of his presidency and beyond. He spoke often about the bodyguard's legacy, reminding everyone that heroism isn't about the title you hold or the recognition you receive. Heroism is about the quiet, everyday choices that make a difference. It's about standing tall when no one is watching, and it's about choosing to protect others, even at your own cost. As time passed, the bodyguard's name continued to be whispered in reverence. But it was more than just a name, it became a symbol of everything that was good in the world. It became a rallying cry for people to act with integrity, to protect those who are vulnerable, and to love without conditions. In the end, the story wasn't just about one man's sacrifice, it was about how that sacrifice awakened the hearts of millions. The bodyguard had made the ultimate sacrifice, but his true legacy was not in his death, it was in how his life, and the choice he made in the final moment ignited the potential for greatness in others. His story left us all with one fundamental question: what kind of legacy will we leave? And so, as we carry on, each of us has an opportunity to write our own story, to make choices that inspire, to offer help when it is needed most, and to always choose kindness, even when it feels hard, even when it feels inconvenient. The bodyguard sacrifice was a gift, one that each of us can honor by living with the same courage, the same compassion, and the same unwavering commitment to the good in this world. His story is a testament to what happens when we choose to put others before ourselves. It is a call to all of us to be better, to do better, and to remember that no act of kindness is ever too small. So, let his legacy live on, not just in the pages of history, but in the actions we take every single day. For in the end, we all have the power to change the world. We all have the capacity to be heroes in our own right. And if we each choose to live with the same selflessness, the same dedication, the same commitment to others, then we, too, will create a legacy worthy of remembrance. The bodyguard showed us that courage isn't just about a moment, it's about a lifetime of small, quiet acts that change everything.